My name is Kyle Gleed. I'm a Senior Technical Marketing Manager at VMware, and I oversee the ESXi platform. So pretty much everything related to ESXi I work with. The disclaimer, which you will see many times, and since this is most likely your first time seeing it, I'll go ahead and give everybody a second to read through it. All right, so here's the agenda I have. We'll start out a little bit with convergence. vSphere 5.0 is the first release to include only the ESXi hypervisor. We'll talk a little bit about convergence. We'll get into the ESXi architecture. When talking about upgrades, it's important that you understand the architecture, as when we get into requirements and limitations, having that understanding of architecture will help understand why things are the way they are, why requirements are there, things you need to look for. Then we'll get into some of the upgrade requirements and limitations. I'll go over some tips. We'll talk about the upgrade process, what are the steps, and then we'll wrap it up by going over some of the post-upgrade considerations, such as do I upgrade tools, do I upgrade my virtual hardware, what about my VMFS volumes, and then we'll see where we're at that point. I'll try and get things done so we have a few minutes for Q&A. If for some reason I don't get done, I'll make myself available outside for as long as I can. So real quick, just to help me understand who I've got here, how many people are running a pure ESX environment today? Okay, that's a good number of you. That's what I was hoping. So let's go ahead and jump in. So vSphere 5.0 is the first release to only include the ESXi hypervisor. So what that means, basically, is that the the ESX service console is gone. So that means when you migrate from ESX to ESXi, you have to take into account the fact that you're losing your service console. So there's going to be some changes in the way you manage your ESX host. We have the ESXi shell, which is essentially tech support mode rebranded for people who are familiar with tech support mode. We have a new CLI, the ESX CLI. In addition, we have vCLI and Power CLI. So really, these are remote CLI tools that use the APIs. And so there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, a little bit of adjustment as you switch from ESX to ESXi. We've been touting the benefits of ESXi for a while. It's smaller, it's lightweight, it's more secure, and it has this neat dual image architecture that I really like, and I'm going to go over that in the next couple slides. But the good news is, with 5.0, we support in-place upgrade directly from ESX and ESXi 4.x to 5.0. And so when I say in-place upgrade, I mean we will basically auto-detect that you have an ESX image, we will upgrade the image, we will preserve your configuration, and we'll preserve the VMFS data store. And that's what we're going to be going over today. There are some requirements, there are some limitations, there's some caveats, we'll cover those. Okay, so migrating from ESX to ESXi. So again, we do have the in-place migration using both the ESXi installer as well as Update Manager. When you install, it will basically scan the boot disk, it will detect that you have an existing installation, it will do some checks to make sure the disk supports upgrade, and then it will proceed the upgrade. It is sensitive to the boot disk layout. And so when we get into the requirements, I'm talking about the requirements and how the boot disk is partitioned and where things reside. There are some requirements there. We are sensitive to that. The basic process, we take the boot disk, we take that first gig of the boot disk, we repartition it in the ESXi format, and then we lay down the ESXi 5.0 bits, and we bring the host configuration back in, and the big thing is we will preserve the VMFS data store that's on that disk. So anything you have on that will be preserved as well. Okay, so what are some things I need to watch for? What are some considerations? So obviously the big thing is because the service console goes away, I have to look inside the service console and say, what is running in there? What type of agents do I have? What type of scripts do I have? What type of customizations have I done? And when I go to ESXi 5.0, do I still need those agents? Do I still need those scripts? Do I still need those customizations? A lot of times what you'll find is those things become deprecated because a lot of what runs in the service console is there to help manage the service console. The service console goes away, I don't need it there anymore. The need for this script goes away because I no longer have a service console. However, there are still going to be some agents you need. There still may be some scripts that you want to keep around. So how do you handle those? Agents, for the most part, most vendors, most agents, they have a version that is compatible with ESXi. Keep in mind, ESXi has been out for about 3-4 years. We came out with ESXi 3.5, and so a lot of vendors have now caught up, and we do have, most vendors will have a version of their agent that will run. Typically it runs in a management VM, and it uses the API and kind of an agentless monitoring capability. So if you have agents running in the service console, you need to contact your vendor and find out, hey, do you have a version that supports ESXi? Scripts. If you have custom scripts running in the service console, and if there are scripts you want to keep around, pretty much what you need to do is you need to look at the vCLI, the Power CLI, and you need to convert those scripts from bash shell or whatever you're running over to the vCLI or the Power CLI. And the last thing to kind of look at is a lot of people install optional third-party components inside their service console. So they'll get packages, they'll install it in there, and then when you go to ESXi, obviously we're going to be laying out a new image, and we're going to be overriding what you have in the service console. So if you have any third-party software in the service console, you need to account for that as well. Custom drivers, custom SIM providers, Nexus 1000V, the Power Path, anything like that running in the service console, you will need to get the version that's compatible with ESXi. That usually comes as a VIB, a vSphere installation bundle. It's distributed as a software depot many times, and you need to after you upgrade, you can reinstall the package, or you can use the new vSphere 5.0 image builder CLI, and you can add that to your installation image so it gets added ahead of time. So I think that addresses kind of the three main concerns people have going from ESX to ESXi as far as, I got things running in my service console, I've got custom scripts, what do I do with those? And hey, I've got some packages I've installed, what do I do with those? So when you do upgrade, as part of the convergence, when you're on ESX, going to ESXi, these are just some things you want to make sure you look at. Okay, now let's compare that to ESXi. So if you're on ESXi 4.x, 4.0 or 4.1, it's a lot easier simply because the service console is it's already been removed. You're already running on ESXi. So when you upgrade from ESXi to ESXi 5.0, we're basically using the same disk architecture. There's very minimal changes. There's no repartitioning of the disk in this case. We basically just save off the host configuration, lay down the new binaries, and restore the host configuration. So it's a little bit easier, but it is important to keep in mind in both cases the contents of the disk do get, the ESXi partitioning do get overwritten. Okay, so that's all I want to talk about on convergence. I think most of us have been aware. We've announced convergence a while back, so no big surprises there. So now let's go into the ESXi architecture. Now, I take a little bit of time on the architecture because I think it's important, because when I start talking about requirements, when you understand the architecture, you understand why those requirements exist. So what I have here on the screen is an example of the ESXi partition layout. We have what we call the dual image architecture, which can go over. It's laid out on the first gigabyte of the disk. So we basically take the first gig and we create these 5 partitions. The first partition is a small little bootloader. Then we have a scratch partition and a second scratch partition. The scratch partitions are in a sense redundant, and that's where the dual image comes in. We have a diagnostics partition where we store things like core dumps and things like that. Then we have a store partition, which is where things like the VMware tools, ISOs get placed. So that's the first gigabyte. Now when you install ESXi, it tells you need a disk that's at least 5 gig. So if it only takes 1 gig, what do I need 5 gig for? Because right after this 1 gig, we're going to take the next 4 gig and create a scratch partition. The scratch partition is kind of a working area for ESXi. It's where the logs will get stored and things like that. So the 1 gig plus the 4 gig, that's the 5 gig. Okay. So I only show the first gig here because when you do the upgrade, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to look at the first gig of the disk and we're going to make sure we have that available so we can repartition it for ESXi, and then we're going to overlay it with the ESXi architecture, and then that's essentially how the upgrade works. Let's take a minute and talk about the dual image architecture. So essentially what this means is when you first install your host, the hypervisor gets installed in the first boot bank. We'll call it boot bank A. So then you boot up, you're running off of image 1 out of boot bank A. Now let's say after you've installed it, you do an update, you do some patches, you do some changes. Well, the way it works is the new image, the new update, will get put into image B, boot bank B, And then the bootloader will basically move the pointer to point to boot bank B. So when you boot up, you're not booting up off your new image off of boot bank B. Your old image is still in boot bank A unaffected. So let's say that after I booted up, I'm having some problems. I missed the driver, I'm having some weird errors, I'm not sure things are right. I want to go back to where I was before. I want to go back to image 1. So you reboot the box, and in the boot up screen you do a Shift R, and it basically tells the bootloader to move its pointer back to boot bank A, and you'll reboot off the previous image. So it's kind of a fail back to my last known good copy. So that's the dual image architecture ESXi. I think that's a pretty innovative, pretty slick, and I bring it up here just to kind of help you understand when you look at that boot disk partition, the boot disk, you look at the partitioning, you can kind of see how it's laid out, why it's laid out the way it is. And then hopefully as we go through the presentation and we talk about the requirements, this will help to make sense of why those requirements are what they are. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the requirements. So with 5.0, 64-bit hardware, this is nothing new. This has been a requirement all along. So this is both for the ESXi host, for the vCenter server, as well as for the update manager, and it includes both the hardware and the OS. So we require 64-bit hardware, 64-bit OSs for vCenter update manager. You do need vCenter 5.0. You cannot manage an ESXi 5.0 host using vCenter 4.x. You need to upgrade vCenter. So most of us, most of us using vCenter, so for that reason, in pretty much all cases, the upgrade starts with upgrading vCenter. When you upgrade vCenter, you can manage ESX, ESXi 3.5, as well as 4.x, as well as 5.0, all from the vCenter 5.0. If you're going to manage 3.5 host from your vCenter 5.0, you need to retain a legacy license server. The licensing changed between 3.5 and 4.0, so you need to retain that legacy virtual infrastructure license server in order to continue to manage 3.5 host. In order to upgrade, the host has to be running ESXi 4.x. So if you're running ESX 3.5, ESXi 3.5, you have to first upgrade that to 4.x and then upgrade it to 5.0. You can't go directly from 3.5 to 5.0. If you're running 4.0, you can go directly to 5.0. You don't need to step 4.0 to 4.1 to 5.0. You can go directly from 4.0 or 4.1 directly to 5.0. But if you're on 3.5, you have that interim step. In-place upgrades only. So what I mean by that is if you're booting off local disk, we can upgrade that local disk to 5.0. If you're booting off SAN, we can boot that boot device up to 5.0. If you're booting off local disk and you want to start booting off SAN, you want to make that change, we can't do that as part of an upgrade. You're going to have to basically do a fresh install on the new boot device. And the reason is because we're taking the existing boot device and we're overlaying it, repartitioning it. So obviously there's no provisions for changing the boot device. And the host has to meet the storage and disk partitioning and the free space requirements, and we'll get into those next. So what are the boot disk requirements? So we need to have at least 50 meg free on the VMFS data store. The reason why is because we're going to basically copy the host configuration over to this 50 meg space on the VMFS. We're going to overlay the data, and then we're going to restore that configuration. So it's a temporary saving area where we save the host configuration. This applies for both ESX and ESXi. So you need to have 50 meg available on your VMFS data store. In addition, if you're using Update Manager and you're upgrading ESX using Update Manager, you need to have an additional 350 meg free in the /boot partition. So log on to Service Console, df-h, see if you got 350 meg free. And the reason this is needed is because Update Manager is going to copy some scripts onto the host. These scripts are scripts that are used to basically scan the host, make sure you meet the requirements. They're scripts that will go out and do the backup. And so we need to have a place to copy those. So what we do is we put those in a temporary and /boot. So, so the Update Manager, the 350 meg only required if you're using Update Manager. If you don't have the 350 meg in boot, you can use the installer. And the last thing, the VMFS volume must start after sector 184-3200. That's pretty much a direct quote out of the upgrade guide. And a lot of you may say, what does that mean? Essentially what that means is the VMFS volume has to begin beyond that 1 gig mark. So when we talked about the architecture, I showed you how that first gig is taken and we lay out those 5 partitions. So you just have to make sure the VMFS volume starts after that 1 gig mark so we can preserve it. If you've done a custom disk partitioning and you've made your /boot 500 meg instead of 1 gig, the VMFS may start at like 800 megs, and when you overlay that partition table, it will step on it. So essentially what that is saying is just make sure the VMFS volume begins after the 1 gig mark. So with that, one thing to keep in mind here is disk partitioning is usually only an issue if you're on ESX and you use custom disk partitioning. If you use the default disk partitioning, then you're going to be okay, most likely. If you use custom disk partitioning, you're going to have to pay attention to this, because if you've undersized the disk from what the assumptions we're making, then you could have some problems. So the next slide, I just got a couple of examples of ways you can log on and check to see if your host is going to be able to be upgraded. So here what I've done is I've gone on and I've looked at the boot disk details in the vSphere client, and I'm basically just looking at that first Linux native partition, and you see on the left there, the smiley face, I've got a 1 gig partition, so that's a good sign. That's showing me that I've got 1 gig allocated, so I got the space there ready reserved. And the second one, this is actually a screenshot from all my labs. So in my labs, when they provisioned all my boxes, they did a custom disk partitioning. They only made the boot partition 250 meg. So I was not able to upgrade any of the boxes in my lab, because when the scripts they used to create the box, they undersized the boot partition. So that's just something, that's one thing you can check. Another thing you can check is, how do I know if my VMFS volume starts beyond sector or 1A4 3200? Log on to Service Console, run fdisk-ul, and look at the start. That start will tell you the sector number where it starts. So on the top, you see we're starting well after the 1 gig boundary, and in the bottom, you see it starts within the boundary. So there's a couple of things you can do just to check to make sure your ESX box meets the requirements. Now ESXi, we don't give you an option to customize the partitioning, so with ESXi, you're in good shape. Okay, so that's kind of the requirements. Let's talk about some of the limitations. So there is no automated rollback capability. This applies to both ESX and ESXi. So if you're upgrading a host and you have a problem, the upgrade fails, you're left and the server's broke, you're going to have to basically reinstall the 4.x environment and restore from your configuration. There's no, that dual image architecture I talked about doesn't count when you're doing an upgrade. Because we overlay both boot banks, we don't have that rollback capability. So the message there is, make sure you always have a good backup before you do an upgrade. So the built-in support for automated upgrade does not preclude the need for you to go out and have a good backup. Another limitation that's important to understand is when you read about the new features of 5.0, one of the new features is the boot disk now. We now support boot disks beyond 2 terabytes in size. That's because we moved to a new GPT-type partition label. When you upgrade, however, we retain the old MS-DOS-based partition type, so that requirement stays in place. So when you upgrade a host, the disk partition will match, but we do retain the legacy MS-DOS-based partitioning, so that 2 terabyte limit still applies to an upgraded host, where a fresh install host would be able to overcome that. Preserving the host configuration. We do preserve the host configuration, most of it. There are some exceptions. Let's talk about some of those exceptions. Obviously, because the Service Console goes away, we are able to get rid of the Service Console port group. All the NICs will be converted to VM kernel NICs. Any information in the Service Console that is specific to the Service Console is obviously not carried forward. So, any etc sudoers, anything NIS related, or anything that's tied to the Service Console, obviously we don't need to bring that over, so we don't bring that over. More important is any custom configuration. If you've added any scripts, if you've gone in and you've modified any scripts, if you've changed startup order, if you've done any type of customizations like that, you're going to want to pay attention to that, because those are the types of things that will not be carried forward. Firewall. There's a new firewall, new architecture, and there are some rule sets and customizations around firewall and security that won't get carried over. In addition, you have to be careful because there are some default policies in the security and the firewall that may get reset. So we could spend a whole hour just talking about what gets carried over, what doesn't. I just wanted to bring up the big ones here, so pay attention to any customizations, pay attention to security. Local users aren't carried forward. So if you have a lot of local users, they're not carried forward. And then the last one there, any custom disk partitions. So even if your disk meets the requirements, but you have a fourth partition out there, a custom partition that you use, that will get overwritten. So these are just some of the things to look for. In the upgrade guide, chapter 6, around page 70, it has about 3-4 pages to go over in pretty good detail of what in the configuration is going to come over and what's not. So just be aware that we do preserve the configuration, 99% of it, but there is that 1%, and so look that over and see if anything in there applies to you. Again, the big ones are going to be some of the firewall things, if you have custom firewall settings, local users and groups. Those are the things that don't get carried forward as part of the upgrade. Third-party software. If you have third-party software, if you have custom packages installed inside your host. So if you're using ESXi, you have a custom image that has additional drivers from, say, Cisco or Dell or HP. If you're on ESX, you've installed additional RPMs. You have software running on the host that's not part of the ESXi image. When we do the upgrade, we scan, we inventory what's on the disk, and if we see additional components are on the disk, we'll basically pop up a warning similar to what you see on the screen here. That's a warning from Update Manager that basically says, hey, I've detected some software packages installed in this host that aren't part of the image. So this is more of a reminder to let you know that, hey, you've got some things on here. You're going to either need to make sure you no longer need them, or you're going to need to either reinstall them after you're done, or even better yet, get the VIB, use the image builder, add them to your installation image. But basically it's just a reminder that, hey, you have some things installed on this host. Make sure you get those things reinstalled and you address that. Okay, so just a quick time check here. All right, so let's go over some of the upgrade tips. So this is just kind of my advice to you, some things that I've found that really helped me in doing some upgrades and working with this. Again, always back up your configuration. So yes, we preserve the configuration. Yes, it's integrated with the installer, but if for any reason you have a hiccup or a problem and you got to revert back, you're going to need to fall back to your backups. When you're on ESX, you want to back up pretty much everything in ETSI. Any custom scripts, your VMX files, local images, so just, everybody's probably backing their host up, so just, keep doing that. On ESXi, since many people are on ESX, not familiar with ESXi, I thought it'd be good to throw up an example of the backup command, the VICFG backup. In addition, there's a power CLI equivalent to that. So when you back it, just make sure you back up your host configuration so that if you do get in a jam, need to restore, you have that available to you. Leverage the vSphere capabilities. I think everybody here probably shares the goal that I want to be able to upgrade with 0 VM downtime. In order to upgrade with 0 VM downtime, in most cases, you're going to need to use vMotion. You may need to use storage vMotion to move things off local storage. You may want to have HA and DRS, because as I roll the upgrade through my cluster, I'm going to be moving VMs around. It's good to have DRS there to kind of keep things balanced. So use those features. Now, I know a lot of you may say, well, wait a minute, I don't have those features enabled. I've only got the standard edition. I don't have the Enterprise Plus edition. When you install vCenter 5.0 or when you upgrade from vCenter 5.0, you get a free 60-day trial license. That 60-day trial license is a full unrestricted license that gives you access to everything. So after you upgrade vCenter, use that 60-day window. Go in, use storage vMotion to move things off local storage, get them onto shared storage. Go ahead and use HA and DRS to help enable a rolling upgrade so you can roll the upgrade through your cluster. One thing you want to keep in mind, though, is that's 60 days, and it's 60 days from the time you install vCenter. So make sure before that 60 days is up, you go in and put your permanent license in there so you don't have things get shut down on you, disabled on you. Host profiles, I recommend host profiles simply because if you have a lot of hosts and you're doing a lot of upgrades, it seems inevitable that you always end up in a situation where vMotion doesn't get set on a specific host, or a setting gets changed here, the NTP gets changed here, and you have a config drift. Host profiles will allow you to basically create a host profile from your first host after you've upgraded, after it has the configuration you want, apply that to all the other hosts, and then that way you can just scan and you can identify any configuration drift between your hosts. And that will come in handy as part of the upgrade, so you can make sure that when you are done that your hosts have the final configuration. Since we're talking a little bit about licensing, I just want to, sorry? Okay, sorry. When you install the question I get a lot is, what about licenses? Well, how do I get my 5.0 license? So everybody who has an active support and subscription contract is entitled to a free upgrade to 5.0. And the way you get that is you basically log on to whatever the website is where you manage your licenses. And you basically log on, accept the new end user license agreement, and those licenses should be there available for you. If they're not, get with your partner, get with your sales team, and work with the folks to make sure that happens. The links here, I'm told that you'll be able to download these slides after VMworld, so I put the links in there so that you can basically go find more information out about licensing and how to get those license keys. But remember, you know, that 60-day eval period is really nice. Use it in the lab, use it to test. I've done a lot of testing, just kind of a side note. A lot of my upgrade testing has been done using Fusion with nested ESX, and it's great for testing. It's great, so if you want to test it out a few times before you actually do it in your environment, you got Workstation, you got Fusion, use this temp license and go to town. Very, very slick. Okay, so that's my advice, my tips on upgrading. Now let's go over the actual upgrade process. So you can think of the upgrade process in 4 steps. Upgrade vCenter, upgrade your ESX host, and then upgrade your VMs and upgrade your VMFS. I have steps 3 and 4 here listed as VMs first, VMFS last. It doesn't have to be that way. You can do VMFS independent of your VMs. But I just put it here for the layout of 4 basic steps. I don't really get into vCenter upgrade here because we're focusing more on ESXi upgrades. The upgrade for vCenter is pretty straightforward. I think most people have upgraded from 2.5 to 4.0, 4.0 to 4.1. So most people have good experience upgrading vCenter. Let's see. Yeah, so each phase is really independent. So you can do phase 1 and then you can go 2-3 months. You don't have to do phase 2 right away. You can do phase 2 and then you can wait to do phase 3 and phase 4. So you need to take them in order with the exception of those last 2, but there's no requirement that you have to do them bim, bam, boom. You can do one, then wait, do another one, and wait. Okay, as far as which upgrade method should you use, I talked about how you can upgrade using the ESXi installer, you can upgrade using Update Manager, you can even upgrade doing a fresh install and manually reapplying the configuration. Which method you use is largely personal preference. In this table, I've kind of laid them out as the way I prefer to do it. If I have Update Manager, if Update Manager is available to me, I will use Update Manager. Update Manager is automated, it's very slick. The only downside to using Update Manager is it can be a little bit slow. And the reason I say that is because Update Manager puts the box in maintenance mode, and then he'll kind of wait, and he'll go back and check, hey, is he in maintenance mode yet? No, he'll wait, okay, is he in maintenance? So there's a lot of time kind of spent waiting for the box to go into maintenance mode, waiting for the box to reboot, waiting for the box to reconnect. And so, we're talking like 2-3 minutes, where if you're on the ESXi installer and you're hitting enter all the way through, so it can be a little bit slower, but for the most part, I like the automated aspects of it. I like the ability to basically go in, upgrade a cluster and have it roll that upgrade through the cluster, very slick. ESXi installer, if you have a small number of hosts, works great. The big thing with the ESXi installer is if you're doing it in interactive mode, you got to be there on the console and you got to watch it. You can script the upgrade, so using the installer and a scripted install, you can do an upgrade using scripting. That's great if you're somebody who's already doing some scripting. If you're kind of an advanced shop and you have those scripting capabilities, that scripting skill, then yes, you can do that. And then the last option, doing a new install, that may be something you want to look at if your host obviously doesn't meet the boot disk requirements. You have custom disk partitioning. You have some of those 3.5 hosts that maybe aren't going to be able to be upgraded using Update Manager or the installer. So that's really your migration methods, and again, my personal preference is to use Update Manager, then the installer. What you use is really up to you. They all work pretty much the same. When you upgrade, so when you're at the console and you're hitting enter, the experience is pretty much the same whether you're doing ESX or ESXi. There's really nothing from the appearance that would indicate that, hey, you're upgrading ESX host versus an ESXi host. The look and feel is pretty much the same. Under the covers, things are a little bit different. When you upgrade an ESX host, you are going to be repartitioning that first gig of the boot disk. So there's actually some disk repartitioning going on. It's a little bit more involved, a little bit more sensitive to the disk layout. In addition, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but the scratch directory I talked about, that first gig is the partition table, then that next 4 gig is a scratch partition. If I have an ESX host and my first gig is there and then my VMFS falls right at that 1 gig boundary, obviously I don't have 4 gig for my scratch partition. Where's my scratch partition going to go? We're going to basically put that inside the VMFS, and I got an example coming up to show you how that works. When you upgrade from ESXi, it's the same basic process. The big difference is we don't repartition the disk. So we're basically just going to relay out the bits on the disk. So here's kind of a flow chart to kind of help show how the upgrade process works going from ESX 4.x to ESXi. So you basically, the installer is going to determine your eligibility. It's going to look for the disk requirements, make sure they're met. Look for the free space requirements, make sure they're met. They're going to look and make sure the VMFS volume starts beyond the 1 gig boundary. And the host is either going to be found to be compatible or incompatible. If the host is compatible, then we're going to save the configuration off. And where does the configuration get saved to? That 50 meg space we're using in the VMFS. And then it's going to go ahead and repartition that boot disk. It's going to lay out ESXi 5.0. It's going to restore the configuration, and then you're pretty much done with your upgrade. When you do the installation, when you use the installer, if the installer does a scan and he checks to see if the host is eligible for upgrade, if it fails those checks, the installer doesn't fail. What the installer basically does, it comes up with a pop-up and says, hey, we're going to overwrite the disk. So instead of getting an option to upgrade, you get an option pop-up saying you're going to overwrite. So you need to be careful. If you're trying to do an upgrade and you don't get the option to upgrade, that means the installer has failed his checks, which means you need to go back and look and make sure that I have the, if you're using Update Manager, I have 350 meg in boot. If you're doing a regular installer, you have the 50 meg free in your data store. Make sure your VMFS volume starts at the right place. Okay, so here's a before and after shot of what the disk partitioning looks like before and after, and this is of course using the defaults. So before, you see you have the service console, you have the /boot partition, you've got the legacy, the ESX partition layout. Afterwards, we take the first gig and we lay out the ESXi image, and then we take that VMFS, we take 4 gig and we put the scratch volume in there. So you don't have a scratch partition, you have a scratch volume. Okay, so let's kind of just compare that to ESXi. I believe most people here are probably running both. A lot of people are, so I want to just kind of compare and contrast to kind of help understand. So here's the same decision type tree. The big difference here is instead of doing any disk repartitioning, we're just going to overlay the contents. And so the big difference between upgrading ESX 4.x and ESXi 4.x is we don't do any repartitioning on ESXi, and with ESXi you have a scratch partition, where with ESX you have a scratch volume. And here's a before and after shot just showing that the same partitioning table is retained. Okay, if you read the upgrade guide, there's this a blurb in there basically saying, hey, you can't use Update Manager if you got lopsided boot banks. And okay, what's a lopsided boot bank? So if you're on 3.5, when ESXi, this is ESXi only, so ESXi 3.5, in ESXi the boot banks were about 48 meg in size. When we went to 4.0, we changed that to 250 meg in size. So when you upgrade from ESXi 3.5 to ESXi 4.x, what will happen is it will grow one of the boot banks to 250 meg, but it will leave the other boot bank at 48 meg. So your host comes up, one boot bank is 48 meg, one boot bank is 250 meg. That is lopsided boot banks, and that's what we mean. Only applies to a host that is upgraded from ESXi 3.5 to ESXi 4.x. When you're in that state and you have a lopsided boot bank, you cannot use Update Manager to upgrade the host. You have to use the installer. Okay. Couple of comments on that. It's a temporary condition. When you upgrade from 3.5 to 4, ESXi 3.5 to 4, you'll have lopsided boot banks. But the next time you come in and do an update or a patch, then the second boot bank will get grown and you'll now have 250 meg boot banks. You'll no longer have lopsided boot banks. So it only is a temporary condition that applies immediately after an upgrade from 3.5 to 4.0 and only applies until you do your first update. Okay. Where this comes in when doing upgrades is if you have a 3.5 host and you say, okay, tonight I'm going to upgrade this 3.5 host to 5.0. So I go in, I upgrade to 4, and right after I upgrade to 4, I put the 5.0 CD in, and I boot up and I upgrade to 5. So it's only when you go from 3.5 to 4.0, then immediately to 5.0, where this is an issue. And the issue, the big takeaway here is if you're going to do that, you're going to need to use the installer. If you have a host that you upgraded 6 months ago from 3.5 to 4.0, and you've since applied updates, it's probably not a concern. Okay, but how do I know if I have lopsided boot banks? Probably the easiest way to do is to log on to the disk properties, and you'll see here on the screenshot it's showing that the number 5 is 48 meg, number 6 is 250 meg, and that's just showing it's a host I went in, installed 3.5, upgraded just to show what lopsided boot banks are. So you bring that up, it's probably something that won't affect most of us, but if you have 3.5 hosts and you were upgrading, just be aware of what a lopsided boot bank is, and that's something you probably should pay attention to. Okay, this slide is kind of a summary, just kind of showing what I've talked about with regards to the upgrade process and the upgrade path. So starts with upgrading vCenter, and then you're either going to have compatible host, compatible hardware, or it's not going to be compatible. If it's not compatible, obviously you're going to have to replace the server. If you're running 32-bit, you got to get a new server. If the host is compatible, the next thing we're going to look at is what version of ESX are you running. If you're running ESXi 3.5, obviously you're going to have an interim step. You have to upgrade to 4. Okay. If you're running 4.0, we need to look at the boot disk. Does the boot disk meet the requirements? Do I have the free space? Do I have the partitioning table? Does my VMFS start at the right place? And then if the boot disk works, then I can use Update Manager, I can use the installer, I can upgrade the host. Okay, so we've upgraded our host. What are some of the post-upgrade considerations? So essentially what this is talking about is upgrading tools. Actually, I guess I get a little ahead of myself. Yeah, so we'll be talking about the tools and the virtual hardware and the VMFS, but before we do, a couple other little pointers here. I mentioned that part of the upgrade, we do not retain local users and groups. So a lot of people will say, man, that's a lot of work. I've got to upgrade my 50 hosts and I've got to go in and recreate all my users and groups. Most of us have Active Directory. Most of us use Active Directory. vSphere is integrated with Active Directory. Go ahead, add your host to your Active Directory domain and use your Active Directory users and credentials and stuff to manage your role-based access control. Very easy to do. You can do it from the vSphere client or you can do it from the command line. Refer to the configuration guide for more information. But that's just kind of after I upgrade, I recommend, if you have a lot of local users and groups and you're kind of struggling with that, look into Active Directory if you're not already doing that. When you insert the vCenter 5.0 installation media, you'll notice two new options. There's the ESXi syslog collector and the dump collector. What these essentially are is it's a network-based, it sets up a syslog server for your host. So if you're running ESXi, the host by default will go on the scratch partition, and they'll be local on the host. If you want to set up a remote host and have centralized logging, everybody logging to it, a lot of people will do that using Linux boxes. They'll set up a syslog server. What this is essentially is a simple syslog server for Windows. So you can install it on a Windows box. It sets up the syslog server, then you can go into your vSphere client and you can just basically point the box, and then all your ESXi hosts will be logging to that syslog collector. The dump collector is the same type thing. It just sets up a share where you can store your dumps. So this comes in handy because if a box PSONs, there's crashes and a core dump's generated and it's on the box and you can't get to it, kind of a chicken egg problem. If you set this up, it basically sets up a place on the network where it will dump its core dumps. So that's what the log collector is and the dump collector. And again, those are available on the vCenter installation media, and they would install on a Windows host. If you have an existing syslog server, it doesn't have to be this one. You can use another one. These are just kind of there to help make it easier for you. Speaking of the scratch partition, now I've mentioned scratch partition a couple times. The big thing to keep in mind is when you upgrade, if you're upgrading from ESX, you have a scratch volume versus a scratch partition. It's largely cosmetic. It doesn't really make a difference in how you manage the host. It doesn't really change anything. But it's important because there are some situations where if the scratch partition cannot be created on a persistent data store, it will create it in RAM disk. And you don't want your scratch partition in RAM disk because it's going to take 4 gig of your host memory that should be used to manage VMs, and it's going to use it for a scratch partition. In addition, if your scratch partition is on RAM disk, it's in memory, if you have a problem and you reboot, you lose all your logs. So what are some situations where I might be at risk of finding my scratch partition in memory on a RAM disk versus on a data store? If I'm booting off a USB, If I have SAS disk, there's the way the algorithms work to do the disk discovery and to identify local disk versus remote disk and things like that. Sometimes the disk won't get picked up, and so the installer will think he doesn't have a place, so he'll go ahead and put it on a RAM disk. The big thing here is, and also with auto deploy where you don't have local disk, I haven't talked about auto deploy, but auto deploy is the new PXE boot method. So those are just some examples of some reasons why the scratch partition might end up on a RAM disk. And what my message to you is it's not a good idea to have that scratch partition in a RAM disk. So after you upgrade, after you install ESXi, go out, look, make sure the location of your scratch partition is on a persistent data store. And if it's not on a persistent data store, you can change it and you can put it on a persistent data store. All right, in addition, so the service console goes away. That's going to be a little concern for a lot of folks. What replaces the service console? So we have the ESXi shell. So this used to be known as Tech Support Mode, TSM. We rebranded it, just call it ESXi shell, so a little straightforward. The ESXi shell is there for logging on and doing basic troubleshooting, basic administration. It's a good idea to avoid using the ESXi shell for day-to-day operations. What you really should be using is the vCLI or Power CLI, the remote CLI capabilities. However, the ESXi shell is there, and that's kind of a first step. Troubleshooting, you don't have network access to the host, you can log on the console, open up the shell, and do your troubleshooting. The vCLI, that's essentially the command line interface, uses APIs. You pretty much do everything through the CLI that you can do from the service console. One of the things I want to call out here is in 5.0. The ESX CFG commands that everybody are familiar with on the service console, those have been deprecated. So they're still there, they're there for legacy reasons, but officially, technically, they're no longer supported. They've been replaced with the new ESX CLI command. The significance of the ESX CLI command is that for the first time, we have a single command set that works locally and remotely. So you run an ESX CLI command local on the host, you can run that same ESX CLI command remote and get the same results. The ESX CLI command was in vSphere 4.1. Be aware that the new command is kind of a reworking of that command, and it's no longer, it's not backwards compatible. So you can manage a 4.x host using ESX CLI, the ESX CLI 5.0, but if you have a script that's using ESX CLI in 4.1, it won't be able to run. You'll have to change the syntax for 5.0. The VMA is essentially an appliance that comes with the vCLI pre-packaged for you. Installs as an OVF. If you're going to use vCLI, I recommend everybody have at least one VMA for every cluster they have. Even if you're using Power CLI, I recommend you have it simply because you will get in a situation where you call support and support will ask you to run a vCLI command, and you don't want to be, in the middle of a support call having to scramble to deploy an OVF until you have the vCLI. So just have that available and at your disposal. And then Power CLI, I think most people understand Power CLI is basically a Windows equivalent where you can do remote command line administration using the Windows Power Shell. So when you're upgrading, especially for folks going from ESX to ESXi, this is your learning curve. You're going to have to take some time. You're going to have to learn about the shell. You're going to have to learn about the CLI and the options. The next slide here, I think I break out the options here. The big thing here, again, is the ESX CFG is officially deprecated in 5.0, so the commands are still there now, but going forward, they may be removed at any time. So the idea here is if you're going to be doing command line administration, ESX CLI should be your first attempt. ESX CLI is not comprehensive yet. It's still kind of growing, so you will continue to augment it with the VI CFG, the VMware command, and the other CLI tools that you're familiar with. And again, the ESX CLI, the significance of that is it's been rewritten in 5.0, and it works the same both locally and remotely. Okay, so now we get into the VMware, the VM tools, the virtual hardware, and upgrading the VMs. So this is probably one of the biggest questions I get as far as, okay, I'm upgrading, do I have to upgrade my tools? Do I have to upgrade my hardware? Do I have to upgrade to VMFS 5? When do I need to upgrade? So this chart shows kind of the compatibility matrix. The big thing here is note that virtual hardware 3 is not supported on ESXi 5. So if you're running 3.5 and you have VMs with virtual hardware 3, you will need to upgrade the hardware when you go to 5.0. So when you go to 3.5 to 4, you'll need to upgrade the virtual hardware, upgrade the tools, and then go to 5. However, if you're running 4, if you're running ESX4, ESXi 4, there is no requirement to upgrade the tools, there's no requirement to upgrade the virtual hardware, and there's no requirement to upgrade from VMFS3 to VMFS5. Now, I say it's not required, that doesn't mean it's not recommended. So we do recommend you upgrade your tools. We do recommend you upgrade your VMFS because there's a lot of little things that go into the tools that affect performance and some of the memory management and some of the guest-based heart beating things. So it's good to have those because you'll get the latest benefits. However, if you don't want the reboots and if you got a lot of VMs, it's not required. So let's kind of go over each one of these in a little bit more detail. So tools. So again, if you're running 3.x, that is incompatible with 5.0, you're going to need to upgrade. So when you go to the 4.0, you need to upgrade those to 4. If you're running VMware Tools 4.x, it's up to you. You don't have to, but you can. And if you're running VMware Tools, if you upgrade VMware Tools to 5.0, one nice thing is we do test and qualify VMware Tools 5.0 on ESX, ESXi 4.0 as well, 4.x. So you know that if you upgrade a VM to the latest tools and then that VM gets vMotion or moves to an ESXi 4.x host, you're in a supported configuration. The virtual machine hardware. You need to upgrade the virtual machine's tools before you upgrade the hardware. And ESXi supports 4, 7, and 8. Again, the same kind of thought process here. There's no requirement to upgrade from 4 or 7 to 8. One thing to keep in mind, though, is if you do upgrade to VMware Tools 8, that VM can no longer run on an ESX, ESXi 4.x host. So if you have an 8-node cluster and you're rolling the upgrade through the cluster, you're going to want to wait till all 8 nodes are running 5.0 before you start upgrading the virtual hardware. VMFS 5. So VMFS 5, again, upgrading is optional. You can continue to run VMFS 3. However, it's again same rationale as VMware Tools. It's recommended you upgrade just to get the latest improvements, the latest performance. One thing to keep in mind about VMFS 5 upgrades. First of all, it's non-intrusive, it's live, it's online. You simply go in, you select it, there's a button that says upgrade, you click it, and boom, you're done. So it's very easy, it's very non-intrusive. However, once you upgrade it, it will not allow a host running 4.x to access it. So again, similar to the virtual hardware, once you upgrade it, it's only accessible by host running 5.0. Now, there's a check made. So if you try to upgrade a VMFS volume and there's 4.x hosts that are accessing it, we'll basically come up and say, hey, I can't do this because you have 4.x hosts. So it's got a little bit of a fail-safe in there, but just keep that in mind. All right, so that's pretty much what I have. Quick summary here. vSphere 5 is ESXi only. There are in-place upgrades from both ESX and ESXi. The boot disk partition is important. One thing, a lot of people are starting to bail on me. One thing I want to point out here is I do have a poster that shows kind of a summary of the vCLI. There's 2 boxes back there. They're inside those boxes, as well as I got 3 stacks here. You guys are more than welcome to come pick one up as you head out. So getting back to the summary, your host configuration is preserved. Your VMFS position will be preserved. Again, it's got to start beyond that 1 gig boundary. Upgrading VM components is optional. VMFS components is optional. Watch out for custom boot partitions. If you're on 3.5 and you're upgrading, watch out for that lopsided boot bank. Watch out for your firewall security settings, third-party software, and then again, use those advanced vSphere capabilities. Now, I think it's going to be kind of hard to do questions and answers. I guess I shouldn't have said we're done, but what I want to show you now is we have about 10 minutes. I actually have some slides that are going to walk you through an actual upgrade. So I basically upgraded using ESX, I've upgraded using the Update Manager, and I got some slides just to give you a visual of what the experience is going to be like. So we'll go through those real quick. So again, this is an example using the ESXi installer. So it started by basically right-clicking on the host, putting it in maintenance mode. And when you put it in maintenance mode, evacuate the VMs. This is where DRS is going to come in handy because it's going to help you evacuate the VMs. Then you just put the DVD in the drive, the installation media, and you boot the host. And when you get to the boot menu, you boot off the installer. And it's going to come up with it's going to ask you a couple questions, and it's going to come up with a list of the disks that it sees. You're going to pick the disk that you want to upgrade. Now, if you've got a list of disks and you're not sure which one, hit F1. When you hit F1, it will give you details of that disk, and it will show you, hey, there's an existing ESX image on this disk, or there's an existing ESXi image on this disk. So right here is hit F1, and that's the example what you'll see. You'll see it tells you there's ESXi found, and it's going to upgrade that. Then when you get to the next screen, this is where you see the option to migrate ESXi, migrate and preserve VMFS data store. This is where I was saying if you get to this screen and you don't see that top option, so sometimes the installer doesn't quit. He's going to basically say, hey, okay, instead of getting this screen, you'll get a pop-up that says, hey, we're going to overwrite this disk. If you don't get this option, go back and check the requirements. And then here's an example of the third-party warning, basically saying, hey, I've detected some software on here that's not included in my base VIB, my base image, so you're going to make account for those. So just hit enter to continue. Confirm your upgrade. When the upgrade's done, you unmount it, you reboot it. The host boots up as 5.0, you go into vCenter, you reconnect. And when you reconnect, it will reconnect to maintenance mode, verify the configuration, play with it, make sure it looks good, make sure you're comfortable, and then you're done. So as you can see, upgrading, very, very slick, very straightforward, as long as you meet those requirements. Okay, that's using the installer, so now let's go ahead and go over the update manager. So again, the advantages to update manager are that it can automate the entire thing. So if I have a 12-node cluster, and I want to update using Update Manager, I can basically click on Remediate, and it will go out, and it has, Update Manager's been enhanced with some cluster awareness. So it'll basically look at emission control, look at your load, and identify, you know what, I can upgrade 3 hosts at a time. So it'll take 3 hosts out, upgrade those. When they're done, it will take the next 3 and upgrade those, and it'll basically roll it through. It's very, very slick. So you start by going into Update Manager. On the Update Manager tab, you choose the ESXi images, and you choose the option to import ESXi image. You'll import, you basically point it to the ISO, it will load it in, and once it's loaded in, you go and create an upgrade baseline. And then you'll attach that baseline to your host, to your cluster, you basically attach it, and then you're going to do a scan, and in the details down there where it has upgrades, you'll click on the details and it'll tell you why, its status. It should be non-compliant, it's what you want. If it says incompatible, it will say incompatible for 1 of 2 reasons. 1, you don't meet the disk requirements, or 2, you have third-party software on the host, and you need to basically acknowledge the fact that you're going to overwrite that. And here's an example of that third-party software warning, just basically saying, hey, there's some packages on this that are going to be removed. Once you're done, you just click on Remediate, and it basically is going to come up with a series of screens. It's going to ask you, how do you want me to handle fault tolerance? How do you want me to handle HA? How do you want me to handle DRS? Do you want me to vMotion things, power things off? So there's a bunch of checkboxes you'll select, and you determine how you want to handle it. The other one that will come up is this third-party thing, where you basically have to check that option to remove third-party. This is kind of a fail-safe. It's basically saying, hey, you got third-party on here, additional software components on here. You need to check this box to give me the okay to go ahead and overwrite those. But you'll do that, and it basically puts the host in maintenance mode, it upgrades it, it brings it back, and you're done. So going from ESX to, or ESXi 4.x to 5.0, very straightforward. A couple quick examples there using the Update Manager and the installer. So with that, we've got about 5 minutes for any questions. Okay, so the question is about the 2 terabyte limit that I mentioned, and how when you upgrade a host, it retains that. This is only for the boot disk. This is not the VMFS limitation. It's just when you install ESX, it has a 2 terabyte limit on 4.x, and when you go to 5.0, that limit's gone. But if you upgrade a host, because it retains the older partition table, that limit's still there. Yeah? Okay, the question is on the block size, the VMFS block size going from 4 to 5. There are some changes there, and a similar type logic applies. If you have a file system that's upgraded, it will retain whatever the legacy block size was. Where if you create a new one, it will use the new, more efficient block sizing that allows for better, more efficient disk usage. So, but it's the same type thing. If you do an upgrade, you need to be aware that there's some legacy implications to doing that. You just need to go into Image Builder and add those components to your image, and that way they're included in the install. Yeah, when you install, they would go away, and you'd have to reinstall them, but you can use Image Builder to add those VIBs into your image. Yeah, back on the mic?
It's on. When you upgrade to 5.0, you say you have to reconnect to Virtual Center. Does that create a new SID for the host?
No, it's used the same SID, the performance, the historical, all that data is there. The big thing is, do not remove the host from vCenter. As long as it's disconnect, you're okay. Don't remove it. As long as you don't remove it, it retains the same SID, same identity. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, if I have my own SSL certificates, do they get kept? Yes. When you reconnect, it doesn't pop up and say, hey, re-enter user password, because it's using that same certificate. That's part of what gets backed up. Yeah, back there. By default, it will go into demo mode. And then you'll need to go in and manually assign licenses. Yep, yeah, right here. Now, there's a question about ESXi embedded. ESXi embedded is basically just ESXi pre-installed on a USB or SD. There's really no difference. So when you have ESXi embedded versus ESXi, it's the same ESXi, it's just how the software is distributed. So that's the only difference. Yeah. Now, the question about link mode, vCenter link mode, and is it preserved? I'm not sure on the vCenter upgrade. The one thing I didn't talk about was the new virtual server appliance, the Linux. That doesn't support link mode, but other than that, I think it is all preserved as part of the vCenter upgrade. No, as far as facilitating, making the upgrade easier, no, there's really no benefits to having one in link mode or not in link mode that I'm aware of. Yeah? So the questions about HA and how does it work with HA. One of the new things in vSphere 5.0 is HA has been rewritten. For the most part, it takes the host, it puts the host in maintenance mode, which takes it out of the cluster. It's going to do the upgrade and put it back in the cluster. So the general membership, as far as when it comes back in, it will push out the upgraded HA agent, it will rejoin the cluster, it will redo the membership, and all that takes place. I've done literally probably over 100 upgrades in my testing and playing. I've never had an HA issue. Yeah. Any special consideration for NFS data stores? No. No, there's a lot of the improvements, a lot of the new things in 5.0 are around improvements around NFS. But as far as upgrading and stuff, no. Matter of fact, one of the things I always do is I run into customers who have local storage. They use their local VMFS and they want to move stuff off, but they don't have a SAN. I'll tell them to go out and grab NFS and move it on to NFS. It works great. Yeah. What's that? I didn't hear.
When's it available for download?
It's available now. It was available last week, I think on the 24th. You can go out and download it. All right, well, thanks, everybody. I think they got another session coming in, so I'll be working my way to the back if you have anything else.